We will be starting the webinar shortly. We're just going to give people 1 minute to join, and then we will begin. Well, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the pitfalls of migrating to free OpenJDK. A little bit of an introduction, first of all. So get my slides going. There we go. Yes, a little bit of an introduction to who is going to be talking today. My name is Simon Ritter. I'm the Deputy CTO at Azul, and I'm joined today by Dan Gallivan. Dan, would you like to say hello?
Yes, great to be here. And so I manage our sales engineering team, our customer success team, which includes our technical account managers, customer success managers, as well as our migration advisory specialists.
Great. Okay, so before we get into the actual session, a couple of housekeeping things just to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. Firstly, we are recording the session, and so at the end of this, we will send you a link so that should you wish to share this with your colleagues, your friends, or even your family, then you are able to do so. And if you do have questions, we'll save those to the end. Please feel free to type those into the Q&A panel, and then we'll address those at the end of the session. Right, so in terms of the agenda, we've got 3 parts to our webinar. First is why you would want to migrate. What is the reasoning behind this? And we'll examine what your motivations might be for migrating. Then, once we've done that, we'll talk about common migration issues. What are the things that you're going to face when you want to migrate from one OpenJDK distribution to another? And then the third part is Dan is going to talk about Azul's migration methodology, something we developed over a number of years with working with a number of customers in doing this sort of migration. So first of all, let's talk about the idea of migrating away from Oracle. And as I said, what's the rationale behind this? What's the reason that you'd want to do this? And the answer is quite simple. The answer is money, really, because if you look at how things have changed over really the last 6 years with Java, there have been a number of changes. Prior to that, in the days of Sun Microsystems, when they were the company that was developing Java, and then once Sun was acquired by Oracle, Java was free, effectively. So anybody who was using Java in an enterprise application on a desktop or a laptop could pretty much consider it as being free. All you had to do was go to the Sun or the Oracle website, download the latest version, download the latest update, and install it on your machine. And that was it. Really, the only place where you would see any reason to pay a licensing fee for that is if you're using it in an embedded system or on a mobile phone back in the day, or on a single-use PC like a ticket machine or a kiosk type of application. But then about 6 years ago, Oracle decided they were going to make some changes to, firstly, the way that they developed Java. And they switched to the idea of a 6-month release cycle rather than 2, 3, or even 4 years between releases. Having done that, they then said that because of the way that they were delivering 2 releases every year, it meant that it wasn't practical to provide extended maintenance and support for all of those releases. And what came out of that was the idea of long-term support releases. This is similar to what other software organizations do, people like Ubuntu with their Linux. And the idea is that you select certain versions to have continued maintenance and support, but other versions don't. And that seems to make a lot of sense. So that was what we moved to, was the idea of long-term support releases of the Oracle JDK. Then Oracle decided that they were going to change the licensing that they used for Java. So this happened around JDK 11, and they said from then on they were going to use a different license that required you to pay if you wanted to use Java in what you would consider commercial situations. You could still use it for free. If you're at home playing Minecraft, then that wasn't a problem. If you're using it for development or testing, if you were using it for Oracle-approved applications like WebLogic or Fusion middleware, that was fine. Or if you were using it in the Oracle Cloud, didn't have to pay. Everything else, you needed to pay for a Java SE subscription. And so a lot of people have sort of started looking around and thinking, well, okay, if I'm going to have to pay Oracle for support and maintenance for Java, is there a cheaper alternative that will give me the same level of support, the same access to the updates and so on? That is really the reason why we're seeing a lot of companies making the switch away from Oracle to other distributions of OpenJDK. And the thing as well is how Oracle calculate the price. In the past, so prior to January 2023, the way Oracle did this was based really on usage. So it was fair in the sense that you could say, well, the more you used, the more you paid, the less you used, the less you paid. And it was based on the number of cores or vCores you were using. If you were in the cloud, you would count up how many of those cores there were. It was a little bit more complicated than that because you had the idea of core multipliers. And the multiplier was decided by Oracle based on the actual architecture that you had in your chip. So whether it's Sandy Bridge or Ivy Bridge or whatever flavor of Intel you had or AMD, then there was a different multiplier that you'd have to apply. But then you calculated the multiplier times the number of cores, add it all up. For desktops, again, it wasn't quite as straightforward as just counting the number of machines. You also had to count the number of people who shared those machines. But again, it was a reasonable number in terms of how much you used. And then you multiply that by the price Oracle gave you, and you get the price of your subscription. But then in January 2023, Oracle said that they were going to simplify the way that they did this pricing. Yes, it does simplify it, but it does mean it's a lot more expensive. And as you can see here from the data that we've taken directly from Oracle's website, the idea behind this is they have a thing called the universal subscription. And the universal subscription says that in order to calculate how much you are going to pay for Java, all you have to do is count up how many employees you have. So that's full-time employees, part-time employees, and temporary employees such as contractors and so on. But then you've also got to add on the things that you see on the right-hand side here. If you're using any external companies to provide support for your business applications running Java, so if you're outsourcing any of your support to those applications, then you also have to count how many of the people in those organizations to add to your number of employees. So you'd have their contractors, their agents, their consultants, their outsourcers. Add all that number up, multiply it by, again, a number that you get from the Oracle website, and that will give you the price of your Java universal subscription. This has led to some quite large increases in the price that people are having to pay. And so we put a quote here from Palisade Compliance. So it's not just Azul that's saying this. This is a company that does compliance for Oracle licensing. What they've said here is, given our analysis of over a dozen active Java contracts, Palisade sees Oracle fees increasing anywhere from 2 to 10 times. And certainly in customers that we've spoken to, I think it's fair to say that I've seen quite a few who are definitely seeing the upper end of that, where they're seeing an increase in the order of 10 times. I mean, to give you an example of a customer or potential customer that I was talking to recently, they were in the supermarket kind of trade, and they had fairly small Java usage. They had about 100 cores that they were running for their servers, and they had about 500 desktops that they were using. But because they had 25,000 employees, total, adding up all the part-time employees, temporary employees, and so on, 25,000 employees multiplied by the price that Oracle gave them, and that came to a grand total of just over $2 million a year just for their Java usage, for 500 desktops and about 100 cores in their servers, which is a really spectacular amount of money. So what we've done is we've asked people about their intentions for migration. And we did a survey of Java users, and we asked people, is your organization considering migrating from Oracle Java to a non-Oracle distribution? And if we look at a couple of years ago, because we've been running this survey for a while now, back in 2023, there was quite a high number of people that were going to make the migration away, so 72%, nearly three quarters, and 28% weren't going to make the migration. However, when we look at the number that's gone up to in 2025, that's risen to 88% who are saying yes and 12% who are saying no. I think the reason that we're seeing that increase is probably because when Oracle made the change to the pricing and they've made changes to the licensing, it didn't affect everybody at the same time. Not everybody's contract with Oracle came up for renewal exactly at the point where they made this announcement. So over time, people's contracts have come up for expiration, and they've suddenly been faced with a much larger bill for their Oracle Java usage, and that has led them to decide to make the switch away from Oracle. And that's why we're seeing more and more people saying, yes, they are going to move away in 2025. I'd expect next year we'll see that number to be even higher. Right, let's talk about some of the common migration issues, things that people face when they want to move away from Oracle. And I think that this is one of the biggest concerns that we have when we talk to potential customers and they say, yep, we're facing a very large bill from Oracle. We want to migrate to a different Java distribution. And they say, how much is it going to cost me to do that? How difficult is it going to be? How hard is it going to be? How much effort is involved? And that's a very reasonable question, because if you think that it's going to cost you an enormous amount of money to switch from Oracle Java to a different distribution, then you might actually end up calculating that it's cheaper to pay even the very large price that you might end up with Oracle and maintain Oracle Java because it's cheaper than actually doing the migration. So let's talk about some of the realities of that. So the first thing is there are complexities involved. So if you're going to make a switch away from Oracle Java, what you're really talking about doing is using a distribution of OpenJDK. OpenJDK is the open source project initially started by Sun back in 2007 when they released the source code to the Java platform, the JVM, the libraries, the language, and so on. All of that went into this project. Now, over time, we've seen that that's become easier and easier to take the source code from that project, run the build scripts, and you can generate a distribution of OpenJDK. And since Oracle have made their licensing changes and their pricing changes, what we've really seen is a proliferation of different distributions. So you can find that Microsoft have a distribution, which is a little bit strange for me as somebody who's worked in Java for 29 years and the history that Microsoft had there. But Microsoft do have a distribution primarily targeted at the Azure cloud. So if you're going to run your workloads in Azure, then you'll use the Microsoft JDK. You can use it outside of the Azure cloud, but it isn't supported. Same applies to Amazon, AWS. If you want to use Java there, there's the Corretto distribution. Again, you can use that in the cloud or you can use it outside the cloud, but it's not supported. There are other distributions like Temurin, which is from the Eclipse Foundation, a free distribution. All of these distributions, as I say, are unsupported, meaning that if you have any problems with them, if there are any issues that you have with running your Java application, there's nobody to call to help you with the problem. And similarly, if you're looking at having SLAs, if you're looking at having guarantees about how quickly you're going to get access to updates, especially when it deals with security patches and so on, there is no guarantee. It's provided on a best case basis, but there's no guarantees associated with that. You don't have a contract with anybody. It's just using free software. So unsupported software comes with a number of risks, and so it should be considered quite carefully if you're going to use that. One of the other things that we find is probably the hardest part of doing a migration isn't actually changing from using Oracle Java to using a different distribution. If you think about the different distributions, they're pretty much all identical in terms of functionality. If you take JDK 8 from Oracle, you take JDK 8 from Azul, it's going to be built from the same source code. It's going to be the same JVM. It's going to run your applications in the same way. We can even prove that quite nicely because there is a thing called the TCK. Unlike other open source projects like Linux, for example, Java has a formal standard. There's the Java community process. Each version of Java has a JSR, Java specification request, and there's a formal standard along with a formal test suite. That consists of something like 150,000 tests, and you have to pass every single one of them to show that your distribution matches the standard. So you have a very high level of confidence that when you're moving from one to another, it's going to work in exactly the same way. So actually installing the JDK and making the switch is really quite simple. The hard part for most users is identifying where they have Java installed. And this is because with 30 years of Java history, what has happened is that people have developed or bought in lots of different Java applications over those 30 years, and they've installed them in different places on desktops and in servers and things like that. And they haven't really considered those applications from a Java runtime perspective because Java's been free. If they needed to update it, they've just download the latest version, install it, and off they went. So there's not necessarily a reason to keep track of that in quite the same way that you would with other licensable software. So when it comes to the challenges that people face, just identifying where they're using Java is probably the biggest thing that we see. So the first thing that we can associate with that is there's a certain level of fragmented and manual processes for discovery. How do people find out where these things are? Do you go to each machine? Do you do a sort of search on that manually, have a look through the file system, try to identify things? If you're running on Windows, maybe pull up the list of installed applications using the Linux packaging tools. Can you find out where you've got different versions of things and different versions of Java installed and things like that? So it's a very fragmented and manual process in that sense. There's also a lot of difficulty in classifying which Oracle JVMs are used and which require a commercial subscription versus unused. And this is because if we look at the way that Oracle licensing works, as I said, up until JDK 11, which is when Oracle changed the license, you could say, okay, well, JDK 11, any JDK 11 I know I need a Java SE subscription for that. But with JDK 8, they actually changed the license sort of halfway through the life cycle. And if you're using JDK 8 up to and including update 202, which came out in January of 2019, that's covered by the old license where you don't need to pay for a Java SE subscription. But if you're using Oracle JDK 8 update 211 and later, then you do need a Java SE subscription. And then for JDK 17, it does get quite complicated. JDK 17 had yet another license, which was called the No Fee Terms and Conditions license, but that only applied for 3 years, which means that if you're using JDK 17 from Oracle, update 12 and later, it reverts back to the old license, which means that you need a Java SE subscription. So just trying to figure out which of the installed versions and installed updates you have require a Java SE subscription is a big thing. Plus, because people have often done a sort of build, especially with desktops, where they've said, okay, well, we'll put Java into our standard build. Don't know if we'll actually need it for all users, but because it's free, we'll just install it on every build. And suddenly it's all the machines have it, but are they actually going to be using it to run an application? And trying to identify which ones, again, provides complexity. It can take a long time to do this. It can take weeks or months, not just to identify where Java is on your machines, but also trying to track back to who is the owner of the applications that are being used in your systems. If you have a very sort of fragmented IT system, which a lot of companies do, where you've got different groups responsible for different parts of the organization, different parts of the IT infrastructure, then it can definitely take time to figure out who's responsible for which application, and therefore who should be responsible for the Java runtime for that application. The other thing is when you're doing the migration and you're trying to move away from Oracle, clearly with the idea that if you're using Oracle Java, you pay based on how many employees you have, it doesn't matter how many instances of Oracle Java you've got installed. If you've got one instance installed, you're going to pay the same price as if every machine in your organization has Java installed. So you need to be very careful and make sure that you've eliminated all copies of Oracle Java that are licensable, and that can be quite a difficult process in terms of just tracking things and looking at how you're doing with that and figuring out which things have been removed, which things have been migrated, and so on. And then lastly, there's that once you've done the migration, because you're still in essence exposed to the way that Oracle do their licensing and they do their pricing, you need to make sure that after that, nobody installs a copy of Java from Oracle that is licensable, because again, with one copy installed, you're exposed to the price for your every employee that you have. And so if somebody installs it and starts using it, you need to be aware of that so that you can tell them, no, don't use that, remove it immediately. We need to make sure we're not using any Oracle Java. So this is where one of the things that Azul have developed comes in, because we've created a thing called the Azul JVM inventory. And it's part of a set of products that we have called the Azul Intelligence Cloud. And the thing about this is that what it can do is it can give you very precise information about what Java you have installed on a particular machine and what it's being used for. So it will give you details of things like the JVM vendor, so whether it's from Oracle, whether it's from Azul, whether it's from anybody else, the various things in terms of the installation location, the application that it's running on, things like that. This is very, very useful, we find, with a lot of customers, because it accelerates that classification of JVM oracles in use, because we can actually see where it's being used to run an application and also which application it's using. And then we can also track that, because certain applications, remember I mentioned at the beginning when we talk about licensing, that Oracle approved applications don't require a Java SE subscription. If you're running WebLogic as an application server on a machine, that will include a license for the Java runtime, so you don't need to worry about those ones. And again, the JVM inventory can really help you identify where you've got Oracle approved applications like that. This can really also save a lot of time, because you immediately can get a list of all the things that are in use. You can identify where you need to make the migration, which machines you've got which are exposed to the Oracle licensing requirements, which are not, and then you can decide where you want to prioritize your efforts to do the migration work. Also, once you've removed all of the Oracle Java and you've made that migration away, the JVM inventory can really help with maintaining your tracking of that, so that you're not going to be worrying about things that have been installed later. You can see how things are going in terms of your migration process. And then once you've completed the migration process, if somebody installs a copy of Oracle Java that is licensable, you'll immediately see that, and you'll be able to track that down and say to the person who's done it, right, you need to remove that from your machine, don't do it again. And this picture here just shows a sort of screenshot of the kind of thing that you get with the JVM inventory. And if we just sort of show you some of the details on that, basically the second column here is the host name that you got, where so we can identify which machine it is. That will help you know where you actually have the version of Java installed. Then we've got the specific Java version, and that includes the update level, because remember, if you're running on JDK 17 or JDK 8, the update level is very important, because lower ones will not be exposed to the Java SE subscription, higher ones will be, so you need to know which ones are which. Then we've also got the installation directory. So now we know that on these machines, it's userlib particular directory within that where they've been installed. So you know that when you want to do the migration, this is where you need to remove things, or you need to do whatever to ensure the compliance. We also have the vendor of the JVM or the Java runtime, and so that will again help you to identify where you've got Oracle installed application or Oracle installed Java instances, so that you can highlight those, and then you can target those for your migration. And then the useful data, even beyond that, once we've identified the actual Java itself, so we know where it's installed, we know which machine, which directory, we know which version it is, and so on. But then the very useful data that we can provide is what is actually being used there. So you can say, right, what did it actually run as an application? So then is it a WebLogic application, in which case I don't need to worry about that. Is it something else, an application that we got from a third party? Is it something we've developed in-house? But also that will help to identify who the owner of that application is. That's what I'm looking for. And this is the kind of information you can only get at runtime. If you do a static analysis of a file system, you won't see where it's being used. So this is very, very important, because if you have a machine where you've got Java installed, but it's not being used by an application, then you don't need, you can just remove the Java straight away. You don't need to worry about installing a new copy of a different distribution. So you can take advantage of that. And on the right hand side there, you've also got some details about when it was last used, and that will help you track down even more information about the usage of the application. So one other thing I would say in terms of challenges is legacy technology. If you're using older versions of Java, open source Java goes all the way back to JDK 6, JDK 7, and these contain, along with JDK, they contain certain pieces of technology in the Oracle JDK, which were not open sourced by Sun or Oracle subsequently. Mostly this is around desktop deployment technologies. So things like applets, things like Java Web Start, and commercial fonts. The commercial fonts is a lesser thing, but Java Web Start and applets are things that were not open source. So when you want to do a migration, you need to figure out how you're going to be able to do that. And that can be quite complicated in terms of using an OpenJDK distribution, because it doesn't include applet support. It doesn't include the Java Web Start functionality. You have to think to yourself, well, okay, if I'm going to use a free distribution, how do I then support my Java Web Start and my applets? The good news is that if you want to reduce that migration complexity, if you use Azul, then we've thought about this. So firstly, in terms of Java 6, Java 7, we're actually the only distribution that still provides support for that. So we still update JDK 6, we still update JDK 7, we backport all of the bug fixes and security patches which are being developed for newer versions where applicable to those older versions, and make those available to our customers. Similarly, if you're using applets, if you're using Java Web Start, we have alternatives that we can provide that will give you the same functionality using different open source technologies. And we have the migration experience. Dan's going to talk about that in a moment. The migration experience to help you migrate your applications from using the Oracle Java Web Start to using what is actually called ICT Web, the open source project. And then we have an approach to help you run your Java applets as well. So all of those things can be handled for the legacy applications, and you can continue to use JDK 6, JDK 7, Java Web Start, applets with the maximum level of security, the maximum level of stability that's available for those. So I'm going to hand over now to Dan, who's going to talk about Azul's migration methodology. Over to you, Dan.
Great. Thanks so much, Simon. So as Simon mentioned, over the last 5+ years, we have helped hundreds and hundreds of customers migrate off of Oracle to Azul's platform core, also known as Zulu. And during that process, we've created a very comprehensive and robust migration methodology that I'd like to spend a few minutes walking you through. Now, if you move on to the next slide, this methodology is primarily focused on area number 3, but I want to walk you through this entire slide just so you understand the benefits you get as a customer to Azul. First of all, starting with number 1, obviously, when you become a customer, you get a welcome package, you get access to the downloads, to all of our documentation, etc. Pretty standard. From there, it moves into customer success, where we have a customer success manager that is aligned to your organization, that is really an advocate for you, and is also monitoring your health, not only through the migration, but also after the migration, to ensure that you're maximizing the value that you're getting from Azul. Now, moving on to number 3, this is where we have something called the Azul Migration Advisory Team. Now, this is a global team. I have resources on the team in the Americas, in Europe, as well as in Asia Pacific. And these individuals, they spend 100% of their time helping customers successfully migrate off of Oracle. And as a company, we've been 100% successful with every customer we've worked with over the years. So hundreds and hundreds of customers have been successful migrating. And during those migrations, we've created a lot of knowledge, best practices, the best practices for planning, discovery, execution, validation. These individuals are available to have office hour calls to answer any questions you may have throughout the process. And again, we have a tried and true migration methodology that includes best practices across the planning phase, across the discovery phase, across the execution phase, as well as the validation phase. In addition to that, we also have Azul certified migration delivery partners. So many customers don't have the resources, the time, or the energy to take on a project like this. And so they work with a partner that we've certified where we've shared our knowledge base, our best practices. They have resources that have gone through the training, that have been certified, and they can help you on this journey, walk you through, the entire end-to-end process. And finally, we also have a world-class support organization that provides 24 by 7 by 365 support. So if you ever have any challenges during this journey, you have someone that you can call. And again, we have that support, follow the sun, many different languages, etc. And then moving on to the next slide, this slide just showcases some of the partners that we have. Software One, Crayon, SoftBank if you're in Japan, Digital China if you're in China, Logicalis, they have a big footprint in Germany and in Europe. We also have a number of other partners that are not listed on the slide, like Silverleaf in India. We also have SCC in Europe that has a really big footprint in both France and UKI. So again, a global ecosystem of partners that can help you on this journey. Now, I wanted to share some of the best practices at a very high level around each of the major stages of migration. And if you move on to the next slide, we have planning. And again, planning is all about, defining a timeline, defining that success criteria for the migration, managing the overall program and project planning, determine the number of project iterations or sprints that you want to go through, such as discovery, execution, and testing. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But one of the things that we've done over the last 5, 6+ years is we've built a database that we call t-shirt sizing. So many organizations want to understand, what is the level of effort? Is this something that's going to take 3 weeks? Is this going to take 2 months? Is it a 6-month project? And so based on the number of employees you have, based on the number of JVMs you have, both on the desktop side, both on the server side, the severity of applications, the critical applications, production applications, development and test, application characteristics, we can come up and very quickly give you an estimate in terms of the migration effort from a discovery point of view, from an execution point of view, and from a validation point of view. And again, part of what we do from our migration methodology here is we have templates and best practices that we share with our customers. For instance, we have project plans that break down all of the major activities that organizations, again, have to go through in terms of standing up a team, who generally should be on that team, the different actors, when they're involved in different stages of a migration project. And then moving on to the next slide, we've also identified that the best way to actually execute one of these engagements is to do it in sprints. And by sprints, what we're referring to is that you go through that discovery process, you identify the JVMs across the enterprise, you go through that prioritization process based on the vendor of that JVM, and then you move into a replacement process where you start to replace those JVMs, specifically Oracle JVMs. Now, we recommend that organizations don't wait until they've discovered everything to start the replacement process. So most organizations have to go through this process 3, maybe 4 or 5 times before their entire estate has been removed of Oracle. Now, another challenge that most organizations face, and this is a big concern, is that once they've completely removed Oracle from the environment, how do they ensure that Oracle remains out of the environment? And as Simon mentioned before, our JVMI tool will alert organizations when Java has been reintroduced into the environment, whether it's on a server, whether it's on a desktop, so that organizations can very quickly notify that user that they have installed Java, and again, replace that Oracle Java with Platform Core. Moving on to the next slide, and really the next phase is this post-migration validation, which is really important. And this is all about monitoring applications that have been migrated for stability and performance over time. Again, as I mentioned before, we have a global tech support team that provides 24 by 7, 365 days a year support. If you ever run into any issues, they can help with root cause analysis and remediations. Also, it's very important to implement quarterly updates. We, Azul and Oracle, are the only two companies that provide something called critical patch updates. And I'm not going to go into great detail on that, but essentially what it means is that when you have a new version of Java that comes out, there's all kinds of new enhancements and new features and capabilities, but many organizations don't necessarily need those PSUs. They just want to make sure that they're deploying critical patch updates. And again, that's something that we provide, and it's something that we recommend organizations take advantage of to ensure that their environment is secure going forward. And then finally, as Simon mentioned before, JVMI inventory on the next slide allows you to do comprehensive JVM tracking. It allows you to have that post-migration assurance to ensure that Oracle doesn't creep back into the environment. Also, as I mentioned before, it does Oracle Java detection. So again, if Java comes back into the estate, you're immediately alerted to it. It does Java estate management, so helping enterprises monitor and manage their Java environments efficiently. And then finally, as Simon went through as well, there's detailed reports that provide insights into the JVM, into versions, vendors, the distribution, and the time that it was last used. So moving on to the next slide, Simon, I'd like to turn it back over to you to kind of wrap things up and just provide a summary for all of the attendees today.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dan. Yeah, so to summarize, really, I think what we need to look at here is, what you get in terms of migration services, and what you need to make that migration as simple and as straightforward and as easy as possible. So clearly, we're a nice comparison here in terms of Azul versus unsupported. Now, documentation, yes, you will get some documentation even with unsupported ones, because that's what you get available in terms of the Java platform itself. So you can use the standard documentation that's available. But everything else that you're going to need is not going to be made available in an unsupported distribution. So that support, which is clearly very critical. If you have a problem, if you have something that stops working, who are you going to call? If you're using an unsupported version, there is nobody to call. Sure, you can put a post on a forum and you can say, I'm having a problem with this. Can somebody help me? But there's no guarantee that that's going to get fixed, or when, or even if it will ever get fixed. So support is very important for that. And I think to kind of highlight what Dan said, our support organization is actually able to do root cause analysis of problems. And if necessary, we will create an out of bounds specific patch for a customer so we can get them going again, even though that's not integrated immediately into the OpenJDK project. But what we will then do is take whatever bug fix we make for them, and we will upstream it into OpenJDK so that we don't need to maintain a separate fork for that customer. The whole idea of the JVM inventory, which we've talked about, we've shown you the screenshots and so on. All of that is very, very helpful for identifying where you're using Java, and once you've made the migration, ensuring that you don't get creep of Oracle Java coming back into your system, and you won't get that with an unsupported version. The methodology that Dan explained, all of the best practices, the risk mitigation strategies, the knowledge base, all of that is made available to you. Won't get that with unsupported. Sandbox testing, verification, we will help with that. and that compliance monitoring for Oracle Defense, and that certified network of partners, which will be able to help you in a more professional services capability if the migration services that we offer in terms of the advisory services, if they're not enough, if you're looking for those professional services, then you can get those through us as well. So that really kind of sums things up. The key takeaway is that we can safely say that we have a 100% success rate in migrating our customers from Oracle Java to Azul Java. And as I said, including applets, including Java Web Start and so on, we can take the applets and the Java Web Start applications, we can work with you to make sure that they migrate as well. And again, 100% success rate with getting customers to do that. So with that, I'm just going to see, I think we do have a couple of questions here. So I'm going to bring up the chat and see what people are asking in terms of questions. Okay, so first question is, how does Azul handle Oracle third-party installations from third-party products that use Oracle Java within its applications? Yeah, that's a good question. So you need to be very careful with an application that you get from somebody else that includes the Oracle JDK in it. Now, our JVMI tool will be able to identify where that's being used, and it will be able to identify the application that is making use of the Oracle JDK. So you get that information from JVMI. So that's the first part. But then what you've got to be very careful about is ensuring that if the third-party ISV is providing you with the JDK bundled with the application, you need to verify with the provider of that application that they do have distribution rights, and any licensing exposure is covered by them, because it's very rare that that actually happens. There are a few applications where people have done that, but in most cases, people have bundled the JDK with their application because it was free, and maybe they don't know about the changes that are happening now, or things have fallen through the cracks or whatever. So you do need to be very careful with that in terms of ensuring that if you're using an application that bundles the Oracle JDK with it, that they have the license to distribute that without exposing you to the Java SE subscription. So second question is, the JVMI tool is a cloud service, as I understand. How to address customers' concerns about accessing their on-premise IT infrastructure by external cloud services? Dan, do you want to take that one?
Sure, happy to do that. So as you would imagine, anytime any cloud service is deployed within an organization, the security team fully wants to understand the architecture. Many of our customers do penetration testing on the agent to fully understand what the agent is doing. And we've never had an issue where a security team has not moved forward with that service. They want to look at the data that's collected. And again, there's no sensitive customer information. It's basically just where it's installed, the vendor, and the other information that we discussed. Now, in order to use it, you have to deploy a forwarder within your environment. All of that data is sent to that forwarder. If you have different network, segmented environments, you deploy multiple forwarders, but that data is sent to the cloud via that forwarder, and then we process that data, and you have access to the dashboards. We're happy to have a follow-on conversation if you want additional details from a security point of view. But again, that is an issue that we haven't seen with any of our customers in all three of the major geos here in the US, in Europe, and also in Asia Pacific.
Great. We have a third question here. Is there a database of, and I'm assuming this is common off-the-shelf applications that shows compatibility with Azul Java? This technically reduces the need for full regression testing. Yeah, that's another question that does come up a lot in terms of ISV certification, ISV support for applications. I have to say we don't maintain a list of that. It's just because there are so many applications out there that run on Java. It just isn't really realistic for us to try and maintain a list like that. So what we tend to do is to work with specific customers where they have third-party applications that they're using. A lot of the time, the provider of that application will be happy to support the application running on top of Azul's Java. Or sometimes we find that the way that they specify it, if you like, is they say that they will provide support so long as the application is running on a TCK tested distribution of OpenJDK, which our product is. So there's no issue with that. So we don't maintain a specific list. We do have, as I say, TCK tested builds, so that's not a problem. If there is an issue where you get pushback from an ISV where they say, well, we want to use Oracle, a lot of ISVs now understand that because the pricing, it's not realistic to enforce an Oracle policy on users. We can work with the ISV. We're happy to do that in conjunction with the customer to say, look, we will provide support for the Java runtime as part of the customer's support. So if the ISV has any problems, they can call on us for support on the Java platform as part of that customer's support contract. So we give the maximum flexibility for that. And then the last question we have here is, what are the costs for a customer to access migration services? Is it free unless you request for an Azul partner to help? Dan, do you want to take that one as well?
Sure. And just to clarify, so it's not migration services, it's migration advisory. And essentially what migration advisory is it's best practices, it's office hours. We will help you and support you in terms of that discovery process, in terms of doing the inventory analysis and classification. In some cases, we'll help with remediation playbooks based on different types of installations. And then finally, you also have access to the templates, whether that's the project plan, whether that's application owner discovery questionnaires, etc. But if you want full-blown professional services to help with this end-to-end journey, that's when you're going to want to engage our partner ecosystem.
Yeah. So essentially, yes, free for the migration advisory services. That comes as part of the Azul platform core product. That's included in that. As Dan says, if you want to go for professional services, you engage one of our partners. And then another question's popped up here. Do you recommend proceed with functional testing with Azul replacing Oracle Java in a test environment prior to migration to production environment? Yeah, I mean, this again is one of those things that we see a lot with customers. It's the third phase of the migration process, is the verification phase, the testing. And often people say, well, what testing should we do? And that really depends very much on what testing is available for a given application. Some applications don't have, rigorous test suites associated with them. So it's more of a sort of get somebody to sit down on a desktop application, run through standard processes, make sure that everything works in the way you expect it to. Other applications may have a much more rigorous kind of regression testing suite that they have available for that. We would recommend that the approach to take is, as you quite rightly say, is to, if you've got a pre-production test environment, run that with the application running on top of platform core, our Zulu builds, do the testing there, because that will verify that everything works in the way you expect it to, and then you can roll it out to production. So yeah, it's very much based on what's available in terms of the testing. But yeah, so that would be how I would say to answer that one. Okay, so I don't see any more questions in the box, and I think we've been talking now for about 45 minutes. So I think we're going to wrap that up. I hope everybody has enjoyed this presentation. As I said, the video has been recorded. We'll send you a link to the recording. We'll also send you the slide deck, so if you want to reference that, you can. And if there's any more information we can provide, then feel free to reach out to us. And in fact, as you can see here, we actually have a book that you can download for free, the OpenJDK Migration Guide for Dummies, which I authored. It's not a lot, and it's not a big book. It's only 63, 64 pages long, A5 format, so it doesn't take very long to read. And that covers a lot of the information in more detail about the whole idea of migration and planning and so on. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much, Dan, for joining me on this webinar. And thank you, everybody, for listening.